Hello, welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here. It's October. Not only is October my birthday month, but it's also a big month for stuttering and the wider disability community because it's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And as most of you know, October 22nd is the big stuttering day. It's International Stuttering Awareness Day. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We have Nina G and Lara Gabrielle in the house. Woo, woo. Two fabulous authors to help me kick off an October campaign called Stutttober. Proud Stutters partnering with Facetronomy, a design business that connects visuals and portraits to create artworks focused on faces to lift up stories of people who stutter all October long. Every Tuesday and Thursday of this month, we will be releasing artwork and a story to help spread stuttering awareness. You can engage in this campaign and win stuttering theme artwork raffle prizes by checking out proudstutter.com and clicking the link in the show notes. So it's the first day of October and I am already exhausted. I don't know about you, Nina and Laura. Is it just me or is October always just such a beautifully chaotic month for you all?
Yeah, definitely for Disability Month, which I wish every month was Disability Awareness Month and every day was a Stuttering Awareness Day. So that overall is the goal, to not be busy now, but busy the whole year round.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I've got so many things to do in the month of October that by the time October ends, I'm just gonna be like dead or something. So, yeah, it's because the book came out on September 27th. Um, October is my big month for, I'm going to New York, I'm going to LA like twice, um, and doing all kinds of podcasts and recordings and things. So anyway, yes, October is going to be very, very busy for me.
Well, it's okay. We all have each other, and as much as it's busy, it's also super exciting. And so, Laura, I wanted to start with you. I'm obsessed with the idea around your book. I absolutely love stories that peel back the curtain on women in history, especially women who stutter. And it has this Hollywood backdrop to it that I find fascinating in and of itself. So, can you tell us about your book and how this story came to you?
Yeah, the book is called Captain of Her Soul: The Life of Marion Davies. It's a full-length biography of Marion Davies, who was a silent film actress and a sound film actress, but she did most of her work in silent films. And she was also the life partner of William Randolph Hearst, so the big publisher in the early 20th century. And they lived this really beautiful life together, that I think has never really been fleshed out until now. Really, I've spent 9 years doing this, and it's just been a joy. And Marion, was very comfortable in silent films. She was one of the handful of silent superstars that managed to make the transition to sound despite the fact that she had a lifelong stutter. So it's a really interesting sort of nuance of the situation, that it's ironic, right? That she was one of the few people who made it into sound despite having this um, speech disability. So, uh, yeah, and her stutter also, I think, hasn't been given the attention that it deserves in the past, because it was a huge part of her life and a huge part of her identity. And uh, one thing that I say in the book is, at times it was a source of humor, at times it was a huge detriment, and at times it affected everything that she did. Um, and I think that until now that hasn't really been addressed.
Yeah, and thank you so much for telling this story. Like, just um like reading about the book's summary, and I can't wait to read it. I'm just so excited to just learn more about this woman who just seems fascinating. Um, and I and what made as I was reading about the story, I was also thinking about Marilyn Monroe and like how she may have had similar struggles as well. And so I'm wondering, like, is there like, were you thinking of the same thing? Did you? I'm just wondering if that, if Marilyn also ever came up in your mind as you were doing this book.
Yeah, the Maryland thing is it's such an interesting idea, you know, with Marilyn's career and how stuttering affected her career. Um, they were, of course, of very different eras,
Yeah.
and um, Marion was acting in silent films. Marilyn didn't make her first movie until the late 40s, when Marion, 10 years after Marion had retired. So, but yes, they both stuttered, and but I think it was a little bit different because Marilyn was pretty able to, um, like when you hear tapes of Marilyn Monroe just talking normally, she doesn't, she doesn't stutter. It seems to have been a childhood thing mostly, and then she lost it more or less, except in certain little situations. But Marion was lifelong. I listened to her autobiographical tapes, and she's stuttering quite a lot. And this is when she's in her 50s. So it's so yes, they're both actresses. They both stutter, but it's a um, Marion's, I think, was more pervasive than Marilyn's was.
Yeah. And how does Marion's story connect with like the wider misconception of being a woman who stutters? Because it seemed um, like just like the mainstream story about her is very different than what the story that you're telling, which is what much more nuanced and under the surface. And so I'm wondering if you can talk more about that as well.
Yeah, how her story ties into the larger story of women who stutter.
Yeah.
Yeah, she. Um, I think the fact that it did affect everything she did, it was pretty constant, but she didn't let it stop her from doing anything. She didn't seem to have any fear of talking on the telephone. She didn't seem to have any shyness about stuttering around people. At least I should qualify that. People she knew. She didn't seem to have any shyness about speaking at all. She tended to shy away from interviews, which made it a little bit difficult for me. Because
really hard.
yeah, because there just aren't any interviews with her, except her autobiographical tapes, which I'm really lucky to have. And she did a few interviews in print with people that she was really, really comfortable with. But um, but I think maybe to answer your question, she um, at once wasn't shy about speaking with people she knew, but at the same time, she didn't she didn't go on talk shows. She didn't do a lot of the things that the people of her era were doing when, say, the 50s came around, when TV came around. People were making appearances on What's My Line. People were, trying to sort of rebuild their careers, sort of stay in the public eye. She didn't do that, I think, partly because she didn't really want to risk stuttering and um, making people really notice her in that way.
Was she able to call the shots in terms of her how she presented herself in terms of interviews and who to do that with, because I would imagine a lot of women, especially during that time, wouldn't be able to.
She was, and I think she was always, the title of my book, of course, is Captain of Her Soul, The Life of Marion Davies, right? She always did. She always called her own shots. And by the time the 50s came around, Hearst had died. He died in 1951, and she married for the first time, which is kind of an interesting thing. But she married, and her husband just wasn't really in the picture much. He wasn't interested in any of this stuff. So there was no one else really to call the shots but her.
Mm.
So she did, just as she always had. I mean, really, people think Hearst did things for her, but she always made the decisions for her own life.
And I think it's important to kind of give younger people a background on what her reputation was, and the interaction with Hearst. Can you kind of fill in like a little bit about that, because it was always like, she's a mistress, she's a
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
More than that.
It's a love story. It's a really wonderful love story, actually. It's something that, as I said before, hasn't really been dealt with properly. They met around 1915 when Marion was 18 or so, and she was in the chorus. She was in the 1916. She was in the Ziegfeld Follies. She was in other like smaller Ziegfeld shows before that, and a couple of other things. And Hearst was married, but he had a relationship with his wife that was not very strong, and there were a lot of irreconcilable differences. They didn't spend a whole lot of time together, and he liked to go out to the theater, he liked to go out with friends, and he saw Marion in the plays that she was doing, started coming backstage, and as he did everybody else, giving her little gifts and things. But she, at that time, was with somebody else. And he actually, Paul Bloch, I mean, I'm getting into all kinds of stuff, but long story short, she got into movies. She made one movie. Hearst saw the movie and fell in love with her on the screen. Like, he had known her a little bit before, but when he saw her on the screen, all bets were off. I mean, he was just like so enamored. So he took her under his wing, sort of, and she started acting in his films at Cosmopolitan Studio, which was the Hearst production company, and they fell in love for real. And there are all kinds of things we could say about women, the situation of women in the teens, and how she was born in Brooklyn. There was really only one avenue out of Brooklyn, which was to get married or to live with an older wealthy man. And so that's what they did. And they had this 32-year love affair until the moment that he died. And so people say mistress. I've heard people say homewrecker. I've heard people say all kinds of stuff. And it's like, it's so easy to blame the woman.
Yoko Ono kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And it really was not her. I mean, it was a love affair. I mean, a very, very literary situation. I mean, when I wrote their story together, it's just like, I could not make this up for a novel if I tried.
Wow.
It's really, really beautiful. Yeah.
When did you first encounter this story? Like, what was that moment when you first encountered it? Can you kind of walk us through that?
I have always been a classic movie fan ever since I was a little kid. And I came across, I got as a birthday present, actually, a book called The Times We Had, which is marketed as Marion Davies' memoir. It's not really. I go into it in the book, but it's sort of posthumous assembling of her autobiographical tapes. But anyway, I got this book and I read it and I said, this woman had a really interesting life. Even at 13 years old, I knew that. And so she was always in the back of my mind as somebody very interesting. And I started a classic film blog in 2011 because people were like, you keep telling us stories about classic Hollywood, you should probably just start a blog. So I started a blog, and I loved research and writing. And I was putting out all these posts with all this research in it, and people said, well, have you ever considered doing something bigger? And I said, well, yes, but who could I write about who doesn't have a million things written about them already? And Marion Davies was the first name that came to mind. She, she just sort of popped into the front of my mind from the back of my mind, and I couldn't shake her. Like, I tried to think of other people who would be interesting to write about, and I could not think of anybody as interesting as Marion Davies, who didn't already have like 1,000 books written about them. So I went for it. I went down to LA and found her papers and started writing down names, and things just fell into place really quickly. I found people who were still alive who knew her. She died in 1961. So a lot of the people who are still alive are very, very, very old. But one person who's been really helpful is the guy who helped her do her autobiographical tapes, this guy named Stanley Flank, who is a big part of the book, and he's given me all kinds of really amazing things, lots of great material. Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about, like, I know for me personally, like, when I'm on, when the camera on Zoom isn't on, I have such a hard time expressing myself, because so much of how I've learned to, I don't know if it's compensate, but like the way that I communicate is a lot with my body and my face. And I'm Italian, so there's that. But there's also being a person who stutters. Like, I feel like I do it a little bit more to really try to express myself. I imagine, being a silent film actress, that she might have been prone to really be able to act in silent films because she was communicating in a different mode.
That's a really salient point. That's a really good point. She was, as I mentioned before, she was very comfortable in silence. You watch her silent films, the silent films where she's doing comedy, which was her forte. That was where she was the most comfortable. You watch her comedy, and she is so free and so herself, and she's like tumbling around and like expressing with her face, and just you can tell that she's just having the time of her life. Then when sound films came in, she lost that. You watch her sound films, and she doesn't stutter on screen. She memorized her lines. She worked really hard to memorize her lines. And she's able to, to get through all her lines without stuttering. But she's clearly stilted. She doesn't have that free expression that she had in silent films, where she was just so joyous. And she talks very, she really articulates her words. Actually, similarly to Marilyn Monroe, as a matter of fact. She she shapes everything very clearly. And I think that that's part of her trying to control her speech.
And what was it like for her? Because, like, we've seen it in some films, like in Singing in the Rain, where the woman has a voice like this, and they dub it, and that transition there. And also there was the movie a few years back with the
Artist,
the dog. Yes, The Artist. And just like that transition of, you have a vocal difference, and then talkies come. What did she, I get like, right, Maya? Can you imagine a more like a stuttering nightmare.
Yeah.
In the teens, in the 20s. And so what did she experience emotionally, and how did she make that leap, and what was the first one, and what was that like?
She had a lot of sort of psychological issues with it. Um, you know, we could talk about how she probably knew that she could control her stutter when she was speaking lines, but I think that one thing I say in the book is that I think that her voice itself was, the fact that people would be hearing her voice. She had this sort of hang up about speaking in front of people, the entire world. Um, and she tried. There were actually, let me tell you the story. Let me tell you the story of the first time that she realized that sound was going to be here to stay. She went to a theater to see a movie called Sunny Boy with Al Jolson. And Al Jolson sings, Sunny Boy, and Marion starts to cry. And her friend, who is there with her, thinks that she's just moved by the song, and starts patting her leg. And she leans over to him and said, "I'm ruined. I'm ruined."
Wow.
And so she went back they were in New York, coming back from a European vacation, and she goes back to the hotel and she won't talk to anyone. She just goes to her room and just goes to bed. And Hearst is there and says, "What's wrong?" And her friend said, "Well, Sunny Boy got her down." And he knew, he got it that this was going to be a problem for her. And so he went to her and he said, "Look, it's going to be okay. We're going to help you. It's, you will survive this, and just don't worry." But of course she worried, and there were several sound films that she tried to make, and they got shelved because she couldn't handle it. Emotionally couldn't handle it. And then finally she did it. Finally, there were two movies that were made almost simultaneously. One movie called Hollywood Review of 1929, where she does not speak lines, she sings. That was the first one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes. So yes, she sings. This really cute little song actually, called Tommy Atkins on Parade. But she sings. She has no lines. It's just like a variety sketch movie. Then the second one was a movie called Marianne, which was first shot as a silent, and then it was later shot as a sound film. And in that movie, she does a French accent all the way through. So
this is the trajectory of how speaking. This is amazing to see reflected.
Yes.
Career.
Yeah. So that's how Marion got into sound. She finally, did it, conquered it. She was never, like I said, she was never ever comfortable. She was always on her guard, and she retired on her own terms, captain of her soul and all that, in 1937, because she was never into sound, and Hearst was starting to have money problems, and she just decided to retire and forget about it and just be with him for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a story. I'm sure there's a lot of
yeah, I think that her transition to sound is one of the most fascinating parts of her life, in terms of her sort of emotional vulnerability around her speech, around her identity. And yeah, I've done a lot with it. in the book, because I just think that it really is very telling about who she was.
You know, and I think it's a lesson to people who stutter too, that like, I think there's so much like you have to jump into the deep end right away, and you don't. You can ease into it, and we can experiment with our voices and experiment what we're comfortable with. And
That's a really great point.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
like, and where she is captain of her soul is that piece of making those choices and making them pretty deliberately, it sounds like, but also, you know, it's all baby steps into a larger goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Those movies that were shelved, if she had made those, she probably would have gotten so discouraged and just like retired immediately. Mm-hmm. But she and everybody else had the foresight to say, we're not going to do this. We're going to just put it away. Let's try again, you know, and then finally, after lots of trial and error, it finally happened. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, this might be like totally out of the scope of the conversation we're having now, but it makes me think about like there are several people who stutter who end up going into acting, and I'm wondering if it's because they're able to like step into another role where they don't have to really deal with their stutter. They're like putting themselves in another role where it's like it's kind of like they're able to escape it a little bit and like try on a different life kind of thing. And so that just kind of made me think of just Hollywood in general, and how acting could be also appealing. Just thinking about present day, I know it's a lot different with her story, but it just makes me think of like acting as kind of like maybe a safe space for people who stutter. And I'm wondering if you've ever thought about that, and any of you.
Well, and I'm thinking of someone like Bruce Willis, who doesn't always like to do interviews, and sometimes would come off as like kind of aloof, where it's like, nah, that's just stuttering.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to manage it. And Samuel L. Jackson, who he says the F word or the MF word was like one of his secondaries to like get it out. And who doesn't like a good MF from Samuel L. Jackson? I know it touches my heart every time. And
like
so
all over again.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking about Miriam and what you've learned from her. Have you seen a parallel with maybe an Emily Blunt or any of these other folks?
It's interesting. Emily Blunt is one of the people who people ask me, who would you envision playing Marion on screen? My number one choice, I say Saoirse Ronan, because she just looks like her, and she's, you know. But Emily Blunt,
I love her.
yeah, she's great. But Emily Blunt, I think, would be really a wonderful option, because it would be really nice to have somebody who understands this, you know, who understands the stuttering aspect, because it's going to have to be there, you know, because it was such a big part of her life and her identity. And so to have somebody who gets it, and who gets what it is, and what she went through, I think would be really helpful as an actress playing Marion. But seeing a parallel between people like Emily Blunt or Bruce Willis or Samuel L. Jackson going into acting as sort of an escape, is that maybe what you were saying? Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty clearly with Marion, she was really comfortable with acting as an escape, at least in the silent era. In the sound era, maybe not so much. So I'm not sure that the parallel is exactly there, because I also think that Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson and Emily Blunt and these people, they actively pursued acting.
Mm-hmm.
She was almost kind of an accidental star. She was built up a lot by Hearst and the the Hearst newspapers and things like that. She was never that married to acting. She was doing it as a job, and when it was time to retire, it was time to retire. It wasn't like she was a star. Like, people talk a lot about Joan Crawford, Gloria Swanson, these people in classic Hollywood, right, who were just like larger than life, big movie stars with a capital M. And Marion was not that at all. She was a normal person who just happened to be an actress. So.
But first of all, Emily Blunt has to buy the rights to this. I think we've established that right now. She'd be one who could do. We have to make Laura rich, and then they have to hire me and Maya as consultants.
Exactly.
There's that. First of all,
sounds good to me.
And second of all, Miriam, she loved a good party, right? Like, she was entertaining.
Yes, she was very much an extrovert. Yes. However, okay, and this is a big however. She liked her own parties. Like,
where she was in control.
So she would have these big get-togethers at San Simeon, now Hearst Castle, and at her big house on Santa Monica Beach. She would hold these huge parties, and everybody would come. But she would very rarely go to anybody else's party unless she was really sure of the guest list. And so her friend, there's a story from her friend Anita Luce, who said to Marion, once there was a big party happening, said, are you going? Are you going to go to this party? Everybody's going. She's like, nah, I don't think I'm going to go. And Anita said, well, why not? And Marion said, well, when I get among strangers, I never know. So that could mean either. I mean, actually, I had an interview the other day with somebody who specifically said, well, was it because of her stuttering? And I said, maybe. The other thing is the issues with Hearst, right? I mean, people were quick to judge her. So she was hesitant to go to other people's parties, probably mostly because of the Hearst situation, but also probably because she was self-conscious around people she didn't know.
Well, and I think sometimes your life experiences provide a map for other things to happen, and so that you can move into something like, okay, I've had this experience with my stutter, and now I have this new experience, and I can overlay that map from my stutter into this new experience. So I wonder if that can happen too.
Probably. Yeah, I think it's very likely.
And I know she was kind of friends with Chaplin, right?
She was, yes. They were very close.
Yeah. And did are there any stories? Because, comics always got something to say. Did Chaplin or anybody else ever comment on this stutter, or are there any, did she ever meet Groucho? Like, tell me, like, who said
I can't. I knew Harpo very well. She knew Harpo Marx really well. He used to come to her parties.
And like, Harpo is kind of like, because I always hoped secretly that he stuttered and he didn't, but that was my hope.
Yeah. But Harpo used to come to her parties. I don't think that she ever met Groucho. I don't have any stories of her meeting Groucho. She may have met him because she met everybody, but there are no, Groucho barbs. Can you imagine Groucho like making jokes? Oh, like that would probably be quite hurtful, actually.
Yeah.
But but Chaplin mentioned her stutter. Yeah, in his autobiography, he did. Said that especially when she got nervous, she would really be, stuttering a lot, or excited. So yes, he mentioned it.
Okay.
But they were very, very close friends, and the one story that I have is that when he left the United States, when he was essentially exiled, to Switzerland, she was really upset about it, and she told her great niece, who I came to know very well. She's become a good friend. She would recall Charlie Chaplin with tears in her eyes, and say, I miss him so much. I can't. I really want to see him again. And so I think really that aside from Hearst, Charlie Chaplin was probably the great platonic or otherwise relationship with a man of Marion's life. There's more of that in the book. There's some evidence that they had a little dalliance. But
and he's
not
so like almost everybody, right? Like
yeah. but there's little very concrete evidence.
Okay.
Hearst was suspicious enough that he sent spies after Chaplin, and so there are these notes from the spies that I have in the book, saying, "Oh, Chaplin's roadster or whatever comes to Marion's house, stops in front, goes in for like 15 minutes, comes out and drives away." It's like, okay, so what is that? We don't know, but anyway, so there's a little bit of evidence of that, but anyway, regardless of whatever romantic dalliance there was, they were very, very good friends for for all of Marion's life.
Wow. Well, all those stories and more are in Laura's book, Captain of Her Soul, the life of Marion Davies. I'm so excited to read it. And we are almost hitting time. So Nina, I know you're also an author. Do you just want to do a quick spiel about your 3 published books that are currently available as well?
Yeah, can't find I got a messy desk kitchen table here. So I can't find Once Upon an Accommodation, but of course there is my memoir, Stutter Interrupted, and I'm also kind of a history nerd. I wrote Bay Area stand-up comedy, A Humorous History, with my friend OJ. They're available everywhere, but especially at your independent stores.
Yay. And Laura and Nina, where can people find you? And Nina, you just said they're available everywhere. Where can people find you and follow you guys as you kind of move through the world after this?
Laura?
My book has a website. It's called MarionDaviesBook.com. There's also the UC Press website, which is lovely. They've done a great job with that. And you can get the book. I'm having an event tonight, as a matter of fact, at Mrs. Dalloway's in Berkeley.
Oh, cool.
Doing a little interview with Tony Bravo of the San Francisco Chronicle. He's going to be there and he's going to talk to me. I'll do a little reading. And for people in Southern California, I'm going to be doing an event at Larry Edmonds' bookshop in Hollywood on October 20th. Similar situation, a reading and a sort of short presentation. And I'll be signing books at both places. So if you want to come, you should come.
Awesome.
And through October, I am touring with the Comedians with Disabilities Act. There's a Northern California tour, October 1st, Santa Cruz, and then Alameda and Sacramento and Santa Rosa area. And people can find more information at ninagcomedian.com.
Awesome. And Nina, can you tell us about the event we're doing ahead of International Stuttering Awareness Day, your biker event?
Yeah. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. It's just so cool. Joseph De Leon read my book and was like, this book and the children's book needs to be in little libraries across Sacramento. And so he organized a group of bikers, like motorcyclists, who are going to go free library to free library over 100 miles to deliver the 2 books to these libraries. So if you see a group of bikers in the Sacramento area on October 15th, they're delivering stuttering books and they are raising stuttering awareness. Because if you're a movie fan and you're disabled and you grew up in the 1980s, mask was a big thing, and that was like the intersection of bikers and disability. So like I can't get into it, but anybody from the 80s who loved Cher and who was disabled knows this. Like I feel like I have my back, like there's a bunch of people who have my back now. So I'm very excited.
Yes. And we're going to be speaking with Joseph and Nina more about that next Friday, or this Friday on Instagram Live. So make sure to check that out.
And also, like Joseph and Laura are both great examples of allies and people who like engaged the stuttering community. And it just wasn't like, I'm gonna do this thing and I'm gonna look like, I know like Dakota Fanning played a stutterer and her research was looking things up online. It's like, yeah, that's not really engagement. Where both of these folks like really engaged, really researched, really jumped into it and were collaborative. And I think that's the key to allies, is to ask how I can help or tell me about this.
And also, as a biographer, it's kind of my responsibility to learn as much as I can about this, this thing that affected Marion so much, because it really did affect so much of her life and the way she thought about herself and the way she thought about, the way she approached interviews or lack thereof,
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to really understand her, I need to understand stuttering as much as I can.
Yeah.
Important.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being here. October is going to be an amazing month. So much going on. Last plug, please follow along at all of our socials and websites. And we thank you so much for tuning in, and see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Congratulations, Laura.
Thank you.